Hey, everybody. Welcome to Maine's Climate Action Plan, how a plan becomes a law. This is an event to keep the public updated on the progress of Maine's Climate Action Plan, finalized this past December. It is a good plan, and it has the potential to help Maine achieve our climate targets, but only if we can put the plan into practice, right? So today we're going to talk about how that can happen and what you can do to help. I'm Nick Lund from Maine Audubon, and I'm joined once again by some leaders from Maine's climate community. Before I introduce them, I just want to again express my excitement and gratitude on behalf of the organizations in this community for Maine's progress on confronting climate change. Thanks to Governor Mills, Maine is one of the trailblazers in climate change planning, and the Climate Action Plan and some other actions taken by the administration are really putting Maine in a leading position in the nation to address some of these issues. So we want to thank the governor and her staff at the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, GOPIF, and all the members of the Maine Climate Council and its working groups for their hard work getting us to this point. It was critical work, and it still is, because the work does not stop with the finalization of the Climate Action Plan. It's just really getting started. The Climate Action Plan resulted in numerous policies, initiatives, studies, funding opportunities, and other outcomes that all have their own path to becoming reality. And so we're here today to talk about those paths, talk about the ways that we can put this plan into action. And so I'd like to start now with by introducing the rest of the folks on the Zoom with me now. First, we're going to start with David Costello, the Climate and Clean Energy Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine, NRCM. David worked for the state of Maryland, overseeing the development and implementation of Maryland's climate action plans between 2008 and 2015. Hey, David.
Hey, Nick. Hi, everyone.
I'm also joined by Kathleen Neal, the Director of Policy and Partnerships of Maine Conservation Voters. Kathleen co-chaired the Buildings Working Group of the Climate Council and serves on the Council's steering committee. Hey, Kathleen.
Hey there.
Anya Wright is the youth representative for the Maine Climate Council, a founding member of Maine Youth for Climate Justice, and the grassroots climate action organizer with Sierra Club Maine. Hey, Anya.
Howdy.
Another Anya, spelled differently, Anya Fetcher, is the state director for Environment Maine, advocating on behalf of clean air, clean water, and clean energy across the state. Hey, Anya Fetcher.
Hi, everyone.
And Todd Martin is the grassroots outreach coordinator for NRCM and the NRCM Rising Director at NRCM. I sort of fumbled that, sorry. Hey, Todd.
Hi, Nick. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. All right, I will reiterate it now. We are in webinar mode, right? Which means that you can hear us, but we can't hear or see any of you. So if you want to contact us, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. On my screen, it's two little speech bubbles next to each other. Down along the bottom, it says Q&A. Type them in there. We'll save them all till the end and get to them then. You can put those questions in there at any time you want if something comes up. Feel free to use the chat to tell us hello or tell us where you're coming from. But otherwise, we won't really be looking at the chat too much. I did remember to record, so we are going good there. And this will be up on our various channels through the various organizations soon after we're done here. So I think that's all from the technical perspective. And now our first order of business is to turn things over to Anya Fetcher, who is going to do, if you're binge watching a show, every episode starts with a "How did we get here?" a little recap. And so that's what we're going to do now. And I'm going to turn it over to her. I'm going to share my screen so we can get there, and let's see if that works.
Great. Thanks so much. Right? Yeah, I think that works. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Nick. And hi, everybody. As Nick said, I'm just going to do a quick recap of the last episode of the year. So many of you may already know this, but just as a reminder, on June 26th of 2019, the governor and legislature created the Maine Climate Council, an assembly of scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan, local, and state officials, and engaged citizens. Next slide, please. So the council was charged with developing strategies to both reduce Maine's greenhouse gas emissions and to ensure Maine's people, economy, and communities are more resilient to the impacts of climate change. You can see here the principles that are meant to guide the Maine Climate Council. Next slide. More specifically, the council was tasked with developing a 4-year plan to put Maine on a trajectory to reduce emissions by 45% by the year 2030 and at least 80% by the year 2050. By executive order of Governor Mills, the state must also achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2045. And that's the plan that was released this past December. Next slide. So there were 6 working groups with a total of about 250 members that were created to inform the Maine Climate Council and recommend strategies for the climate action plan. Each working group spent months developing its climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, which were presented to the council last June. So the working groups are buildings, infrastructure, and housing, coastal and marine, community resilience planning, public health and emergency management, energy, transportation, and natural and working lands. There's also a scientific and technical subcommittee which provides and provided last year and continues to provide the latest information on direct and indirect efforts of climate change and factors contributing to those efforts in the state. To the Maine Climate Council's working groups to help inform their research and consideration of mitigation, adaptation, and resilience strategies. That 369-page report that they released last year goes into great detail, as you can imagine, on the way that climate change will affect Maine. It's available if you're interested in perusing it. It's available on the Maine Climate Council website. Just a quick overview of the timeline that led up to where we are now. So, as I said, on June 26th of 2019, the bill was signed to create this council. And then on September 26th, 2019, the Maine Climate Council launched its first quarterly meeting. That fall, the working groups met and continued throughout the rest of the year till last June, working to come up with their recommendations and proposed solutions. In January 29th of last year, the second Maine Climate Council quarterly meeting happened. In February, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee released their scientific assessment of climate change and its effects in Maine. And then in June of last year, there was the third of the Maine Climate Council quarterly meetings, and that's when the working groups presented their draft strategies to the Maine Climate Council. And then once those draft strategies were proposed throughout the rest of the summer, the Maine Climate Council considered those strategies. They received cost of doing nothing and cost benefit analysis reports from external analysts, Eastern Research Group and Synapse. And they also gathered public input on the draft strategies via surveys, which many of you submitted. And then in the fall of 2020, the Maine Climate Council refined and selected their final strategies and prepared for the state climate action plan. And then in December, on December 1st, they released their 4-year state climate action plan. It was presented to the governor and the public. I don't know if you remember, John Kerry was there. It was a big deal. So now we're at the point where the legislature will consider and decide any legislative and rulemaking actions to enact into law. So this plan was presented to the public, and the Climate Council will continue to meet quarterly, and working groups will meet at least twice a year to monitor progress. The Maine DEP will report on greenhouse gas emissions every other year, and the Climate Action Plan will actually be updated every 4 years. So this plan is intended to shift and change as we learn more and technology advances. So you may have heard the saying that a goal without a plan is just a wish, but I'd like to add that a plan without action is just some scribbles on a piece of paper, not to lessen the value of this plan. But in other words, the Climate Action Plan provides great recommendations and guidelines for how Maine can achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. But until actual policies are passed and the ideas become law, we won't see much progress as we need. So the Climate Action Plan itself does not declare or enact any laws. And while the targets are set in law, we are not legally bound to follow this plan. Rather, it outlines a set of strategies, policy recommendations to achieve that 100% carbon neutrality by 2045. So there are a couple avenues for developing policy, which we'll get into more in this later in the webinar, but essentially following the release of the Climate Action Plan, the governor announced some of her administrative initiatives and is signing executive orders and submitting legislation. In addition, lawmakers themselves have drafted bills proposing legislation based on or in line with the recommendations of the plan. So these bills must pass through the regular legislative process, just like any other bill. And this is where you come in. Legislators need to hear from their constituents that they support the passage of these climate bills. This is crucial. Not everyone is fully on board with all of this legislation or policy, and some decision makers may be on the fence. So it's really time to make your voice heard. As I said, this is what we're going to get into more. So I'll turn it back over to Nick to talk with Kathleen, Anya, and David.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anya. That was outstanding. And, really accomplishes what I want to do, I think, which is remind people how much work has gone into this already. This was a year plus of meeting and thinking and research and debate that was furthered in large part by all the folks watching right now and many thousands of other Mainers. It's been a real effort. And this is, like she said, a big deal. But without putting it into practice and without making it a reality, then it is just it's just words on the page. So let's turn now to my distinguished panel to talk a little bit more about what some of the concrete actions are coming out of the Climate Action Plan and how we can make them a reality. So hello, everybody. Our videos are all still on, so welcome back. Let's get to this part of it. So the Climate Action Plan was broken down into about 8 different issue areas, 8 different focus areas, each with their own actions or proposals or initiatives. And so we're gonna talk to you about some of the major ones moving, broken down by issue area. But we're gonna start with some overarching ones, right? We're gonna start with some of the actions that came out of the plan that apply to lots of different parts of the state and different contributors to climate change. I'm going to start by turning it over to Kathleen to talk about the first of these overarching issues.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Anya, for setting that up so well. There is so much work ahead of us, and the very first thing we need to do is to make sure that state government has the tools that it needs to implement the Climate Action Plan. So when we talk about state government, we're talking about all sorts of different state agencies, right? So the Public Utilities Commission, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Protection. One of the things that made the Climate Council process so powerful is that it includes representatives from across state government. This sort of whole of government approach is something that we're seeing a lot about at the federal level right now, because that's exactly the approach that President Biden is taking to climate action for our whole country. But a year ago, we started it here, and we've got a lot of work to do in every department of our state. Those bodies, the PUC, the Department of Transportation, they have what are called enabling statutes that set out both their charge, what they're responsible for, and the parameters that they have to work within. So there are certain things they have to consider and certain things that they actually can't really factor into their decision making based on the law. So let's get specific here. The Public Utilities Commission, for example, their charge by law is to keep our utility rates low, to make sure we have reliable utility service, and to make sure that the utilities are allowed to make a profit from their business. It is not in their current list of responsibilities to think about climate. It's not in their list to think about emissions reduction or community resilience or climate justice. And that was okay when that commission was developed and when those laws were established, but it doesn't reflect our values or our priorities right now. And if we want to see different decisions coming out of an agency like the PUC, we've got to change their mandate. So we're paying a lot of attention this year to a bill that was introduced by Representative Vicky Giudera that will change that will actually insert a piece of climate law that says every state agency has to think about climate and equity when they make their decisions. And that's decisions about their programs, about their regulations, and about how they spend their money. That is really, really crucial to positioning state agencies to be able to do the kind of work that we need them to do. The second big piece is Anya mentioned the incredible work done by the Science and Technical Subcommittee of the Climate Council. That report is just an incredible compilation of everything we know, the most up-to-date and accurate science on what impacts we're already seeing from climate change and what we expect to happen. That work is going to be ongoing. The Science and Technical Subcommittee is going to continue documenting and predicting and just keeping tabs on what's happening. We want to make sure that our state laws reflect that. So for example, when we talk about building permits, we probably shouldn't have permits to build in places that are soon going to be underwater. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So we expect to see a sea level rise resolve coming from Governor Mills, and there's some accompanying legislation that we'll see from Representative Lydia Bloom as well, that says we've got to think about what we know is coming when we make decisions today. Those are really key pieces, as you said, Nick, the overarching first steps to making sure the climate action plan can be implemented.
That's great. Thanks, Kathleen. And just to sort of dig into that a little bit. So what you're saying is that there's an agency right now who's tasked with a decision, say permitting a new power plant. And previously they couldn't take into account the fact that this power plant might add to our greenhouse gas reductions, but under this new legislation, they could and potentially change their permitting decision based on the impacts. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
That's good. I'm in favor of allowing them to do that. Well, that's great. And we have actually a question that I'll pose to you right now is that, and this is, well, is there a bill number or how far along is that bill? Do we know?
Really good question. The revisor's office is printing bills every day, but there are a lot of proposals in, as there always are, and it's slow going. So stay tuned. We will have the legislative document or LD numbers as soon as we can, and I know all of our organizations like to reach out to you all and keep you posted on what's going on. So you'll be sure to hear from us when we have more to tell you.
That's right. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I want to turn it now to another sort of overarching or broad-based sort of initiative here, which is financing instruments, funding sources to take the action we want to. Anya, Wright, do you have some information for us about different sort of funding mechanisms here?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such an important piece of the puzzle. How the heck do we pay for all of the work that needs to get done as we combat climate change in Maine? So I'm going to talk about two different pieces of work that are in the legislature this session, the Clean Energy Accelerator and the Land for Maine's Future bond. And I'll start with the Clean Energy Accelerator, which is a finance solution that will increase the availability of funding for energy efficiency, clean energy and other climate action plan recommendations in the state of Maine. And so this financing is so essential to rapid and equitable deployment of climate solutions. And I think the key term there is equitable deployment. So there's so much work that needs to get done, but how do we make sure that that the folks who will be first and most affected by the climate crisis, how do we make sure that they are getting the funds and resources that they need to adapt? And so this bill, which also doesn't have a bill number yet, will draw from successful green bank models. And so green banks are accelerators that leverage public and private investments to drive capital into climate solutions and support clean energy jobs. So it will use this model to create a clean energy and sustainability accelerator that will use innovative financing to accelerate the transition to clean energy, and also will direct 40% of its funds to low income and other vulnerable communities. So really making sure that we're taking care of our most vulnerable communities first. And so this accelerator will also prepare Maine to maximize proposed federal funding. So there's federal legislation supported by the Biden administration to create a national clean energy and sustainability accelerator, which would pass funds to state level efforts. But it's important that if we want to get those funds, we need a state clean energy accelerator to make that possible. And so with that, I will move on.
Yeah, and that's great. And
yeah,
I just want to say quickly, it's great to talk about some of the equity and pieces of this. You know, this plan was being pulled together at a time where those issues were brought to the forefront in the country, thankfully. And I think the climate action team and the policymakers are pivoting to that and really folding that in a serious way to the plan. So I think that's great. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, another thing that I think about a lot and that I think we're all thinking about is, you know, the climate crisis really touches so many different social justice issues. And so the Clean Energy Accelerator is really one of those initiatives that can get to the root to some of the injustices that we're trying to alleviate as we, you know, also solve the climate crisis. So special in that way too. So I'll transition quickly to talk about Land for Maine's future. As many of you may know, Land for Maine's future has a record of success for preserving special places and protecting Maine's natural legacy. Currently, about 21% of Maine is conserved land, but under the Maine Climate Action Plan, the plan calls for conserving 30% of Maine's land by 2030. And so the Land for Maine's Future Bond is really essential to making that possible. And it's so important that we conserve our forests and space to protect our traditional industries, to protect our land from climate change as it impacts our future, and also to protect our open spaces for recreation, as I'm sure you all have used our state parks and national parks during COVID-19. I know I live in Acadia National Park, and it's been, I don't know how I would have gotten through COVID without being able to access the park.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, it's been a record year for recreation in a lot of these state and federal lands in Maine. Everything from state parks, national parks, to, you know, rail trail corridors, to lots of things. You know, LMF is, as you say, really important to protect forests and other sort of carbon sinks, but also giving Mainers the needed places to get out. And that means trails, snowmobile trails, wildlife areas, parks. So LMF, I think, is a double or triple or quadruple whammy when it comes to sort of doing good for the outdoors here. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anya. That's great. So we have, those are our sort of overarching issues we're talking about here, some funding sources, some enabling legislation and other things that'll touch on a lot of different subjects. But now we want to hone in a little bit closer on some of the subject areas, starting with transportation. So transportation, as you may know, is the biggest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Maine. And so some of the climate action plan policies that have come out are going to have an outsized impact in helping us achieve our targets. I wonder if, David, you could start by talking a little bit about an infrastructure bond. That's one of the policies here.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I'm actually going to talk a little broader and bring it back to financing. Bonding right now, as I think many people know, interest rates are historically low. It's really about investment. And right now we should take full advantage of these interest rates to invest in Maine workers and Maine's future. And as Anya has said, she cited the LMF bond. There are a number of bonds, bills before the legislature that'll be addressed. We expect the governor's going to roll out a robust bond package within a couple of weeks. These are critical, as Anya said. If we want to achieve the goals, financing is a considerable, or funding is a considerable hurdle. So one is, we expect in this legislature infrastructure funding, and I'll focus on that. We'll talk about weatherization and broadband in a little bit, which will also be bond opportunities. But looking at our infrastructure, whether it's transportation, multimodal transportation, we expect to see some funding proposals there. We also expect funding to basically seed an adaptation fund, a climate adaptation fund. As many people know, climate impacts are already here. Sea levels are rising. Extreme weather is obviously having an impact on our critical infrastructure. So a fund in the state, an adaptation fund, would provide access for federal funding. FEMA, the Federal Emergency and Management Administration, does a considerable match for this kind of funding. So if it's for flood controls, working waterfronts, ports that need hardening, waste treatment facilities, drinking water, roads and bridges, all of this infrastructure will need to be improved and hardened and become more resilient. And this kind of funding, and of course, this is all about jobs. Interest rates this low at 1 to 3%, we're going to get a much higher return by the work that is done by Maine workers and these investments over the long term. So we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but these are critical opportunities to take advantage of now to really forward and advance all of this climate action in the coming years.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And I actually want to take a moment, as we are talking today about legislation and bonds and things that'll need votes, please stay tuned, because Todd Martin from NRCM, after we're done with the discussion, is going to give some great information about how you as citizens can participate this year. So things are a little different this year with working with the legislature in terms of testifying and how they are working. And so Todd is going to give us some great information about what you need to know about how to engage this year. So keep that in mind as we're talking about the different legislative pieces, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So thanks, David. And I wanted to see if Kathleen, there are some other transportation related policies coming out of this, right?
There are, and it's a good pivot point too, because while a lot of the work of the climate action plan can be implemented through legislation, not all of it will be. Some of it will take place through other processes. And a great example of that is in transportation, to develop something called the EV roadmap. If you've looked through the climate action plan, you noticed some pretty ambitious goals for electrifying our transportation sector. It's not the only piece of reducing, or not the only strategy to reduce emissions from transportation, but it's certainly a big piece. And we've got some big goals ahead of us to get 40,000 EVs on the road in the next 4 or 5 years, and then by 2030 up to 200,000 EVs on the road. A lot of people jaws dropped when they saw that, but don't worry, we can figure it out. We just need a process to figure it out. And so the state is getting ready to embark on this EV roadmap process, where we really look at 4 different categories. One is the vehicles themselves. What kind of EVs are available right now? I'm sure we all have watched, I know I've watched many times, that fabulous EV commercial that played during the Super Bowl about how Norway's far ahead of us, but we're coming for you. What are the targets that we need to meet our climate goals? What are the industry announcements? You know, we're going to get some help from automakers like GM who are saying, you know what, we're actually going to stop making cars that aren't EVs. And what's the trajectory for us to adopt those things? That's just one category. Because of course, we've also got to think about our charging infrastructure. Lots of folks are going to charge their EVs at home, but we're going to need to be able to charge on the road. So what does a gas station turned EV charging station look like? All that charging is going to create some new demand, but also some new opportunities for our electric grid. So we've got to think about making sure that we're ready for that. And then we got to learn a whole lot of new stuff, right? We're not teaching kids to pump gas as part of their driver's ed right now, but we've got to learn a whole bunch of other things. So there's consumer education, marketing, consumer protections. All of that will be rolled together in the EV roadmap. And then David mentioned broadband. It surprises some people to hear that broadband is part of our transportation system. But if we just think about, you know, a year ago, we all would have driven to Augusta and met in a big room somewhere to have this conversation. And we've got more than 200 folks on the phone right now. None of us had to leave our homes. That's made possible by good internet access. And how many more people across the state would gladly have joined us today, except they don't have good broadband. So we've got to make sure that that's a big piece of equitably transitioning our society, is making sure that we have good broadband access as well.
Awesome. Well said, Kathleen. Thank you. Yeah, you know, I just want to add personally, I'm so excited about the EV roadmap future. You know, it doesn't seem that long ago where it felt like electric vehicles were not getting traction and not going to happen. And now, although we still have work to do to you know, get it going right and to put the charging stations out, it feels like it's happening. And I'm just really excited for that. So thank you, and we'll look forward to that moving forward. But speaking of sort of cleaner technologies, there are another sort of subject area coming out of the Climate Action Plan was energy, renewable energy. And so, you know, the state has committed to decarbonization, investing in renewable energy for Maine, and promoting new technologies. And these are really a key way for Maine to move forward, both to protect our environment, but also to protect our economy and bolster our economy. I'm wondering if, David, you could speak to some of the energy bills coming up.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, it's important, as we've said in the past, is that we're sending over $4.4 billion out of state for energy. We want to bring much of that back to Maine and invest in Maine workers and businesses. And the way to do it is what Governor Mills and the legislature did starting in 2019, passed a number of laws that would incentivize and spur the development of renewable energy in Maine. This coming session, as someone mentioned earlier, there are 120 climate and clean energy bills, at least titles of bills. We've yet to see the detail that we'll see in the coming weeks. But we know coming forward that the governor's going to put forward a comprehensive energy bill. There are a number of other bills that we know that are coming forward that will expand the procurement of clean energy, solar and wind. We're looking forward to storage to be a part of that. As people know, wind and solar are variable. The way to address that is through energy storage. We're likely to see that. We'd like to see procurements for offshore wind as well, where there's tremendous opportunity in the Gulf of Maine for offshore wind expansion. We're also likely to see some tweaks in some of the language as it relates to net energy metering and distributed generation. We had really big success in net energy metering. For instance, Maine only had about 86 megawatts of solar until recently. Now in the pipeline, there are upwards of close to well over 1,500 megawatts. Now, much of that projects that may not come to fruition, but there's considerable interest. We need to make sure our utilities are prepared to obviously address those issues. And there's some issues now that need to be worked on by the legislature in the coming months, and there will be. But it's very exciting. There are a lot of, as I've said, bills, and we look forward to working with the legislature in the coming months to continue this expansion going forward.
And sort of the flip side of generating more energy is doing better at capturing the energy we're using already, right? Making our homes more efficient and our other, things more efficient. Do you want to talk more about that side of the coin too?
Well, sure. Energy efficiency. I mean, quite frankly, the most cost-effective, and it's still the most cost-effective way to address climate change is through energy efficiency. And there are a number of bills, as I mentioned, but one in particular, one area of focus is weatherization. There are a number of weatherization bond bills, and energy efficiency is the biggest jobs driver. There are roughly 15,000 sort of green economy, green energy jobs in Maine. The governor wants to double up to 30,000 by 2030. Weatherizing Maine's homes. We've got old housing stock in Maine, leaky homes. Senator Pouillet's got a very good bill that he's put forward that would put $20 million, 10 of it to help seniors and low and moderate income households weatherize their homes, and another 10 million for schools and municipal buildings. We think that's an important bill. We're very supportive of the environmental community, understanding that it takes 2/3 vote in the legislature. So it's critical that this is a bipartisan bill, and it's great to see bipartisan support for weatherization, as well as Kathleen talking about broadband, and hopefully for much of the governor's package going forward, because again, these kinds of investments, these are great business decisions. You invest where you're going to get the highest return for the smallest amount of interest rate. And this is a perfect time, once again. This particular bill by Senator Pouillet, we expect would generate close to 200 jobs alone. So we think that's extremely important. Other things that we're looking at in the climate action plan is to build out heat pumps, ground source and air source heat pumps, putting more money into that. There's an interesting bill called CPACE. It's commercial property assessed. It's a commercial property assessed program to generate more funding for commercial buildings to be weatherized and to put in place energy efficiency. And again, the amount of dollars saved by lowering electricity demand helps lower the impact on the grid. We're going to have to build out the electrical grid in Maine as we electrify transportation and on more heating in buildings, moving away from fossil fuels. And again, these kind of energy efficiency helps to reduce that demand and load and provides more space for progress moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Yeah, and I think the economic benefits and the job benefits of putting these policies in action are really exciting. And I think the climate action, the council who put this together did a lot of good thinking into how are we going to train people? How are we going to provide resources for our workforce so that we can actually, physically get these heat pumps, et cetera, into place. Anya, Wright, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the pieces that were put in there in terms of, workforce training.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, I think you said it well. There's so much work to be done and a lot of training to be done and a lot of new and exciting jobs that need to happen so that we can address the climate crisis in Maine. And so some exciting things that have come out of the climate action plan are, a wish to establish a climate crisis corps that would be an effective job training program for folks to learn more about weatherization tactics. And then also really taking a hard look at the jobs that are in the clean energy and climate solution sector, if you would like to call it that, and making sure that the jobs that we're creating are good paying jobs. And I think that's such a vital component of it, to making sure that, as we transition to a clean energy economy and transition to a climate safe world, making sure that the jobs that we're providing for that are ensuring that folks have equal access to that safe and livable future. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Anya. So moving on, this is going to be sort of our last discussion question here, is the federal piece of this, right? So a lot of this plan was developed and without knowing where how the elections would play out and what the federal government's role would be. We now have an administration that is much more sympathetic to climate change goals than before. We're back in the Paris Accord. We've paused oil and gas leasing on federal lands. We've stopped the Keystone Pipeline. This administration is ready to take action. And so the question is, what do we think that might look like? And David, I'll start with you. How do we think the federal government might help Maine's climate action plan policies and goals come to fruition, or how else might they play here?
Well, we've said all along, and Governor Mills and the administration has said along, Maine cannot achieve its climate action goals, its ambitious climate action goals, and what science requires, unless the federal government's a critical partner. And President Biden has already said, and he said when he was running for office, that he wanted to invest considerable amount of money, upwards of $2 trillion, in transforming our economy into a clean economy, a clean energy economy, clean energy driven economy. And so as people have already said, Anya said, and Kathleen have talked about, where the federal programs will help to fund many programs already established in Maine. So we hope to see a lot of dollars, federal dollars, coming to Maine, whether it's for the adapting to climate change and the impacts of climate change, or expanding broadband, the Clean Energy Accelerator. I mean, the way to accelerate, obviously, climate action across the country is the federal government has the greatest access to capital, is to move that capital to the states to make the investments that are going to drive jobs and transform our economy as we need stimulus. And so we're very excited. The congressional delegation seems to be very supportive. And of course, the federal government, I mean, the congressional delegation has already spoken out about a lot more money into energy efficiency, weatherization, and certainly that's so critical to Maine. But I know some others would like to probably have comments, Kathleen and Anya, to jump in here.
It's just so exciting to have this new perspective and to see this whole of government approach to climate action that has gotten Maine to this point, being adopted at the federal level. And the other thing I want to just add is, there's a lot going on in our country right now. We have a public health crisis, we have an economic crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a political crisis. The sort of old way of thinking about a load like that would be to pit those things against each other and to say we can only solve one at the expense of the others. That hasn't been very successful, if we're just being honest. And there's really an incredible opportunity here to say, let's solve them together. Let's address the economic crisis by investing in climate solutions that, as Anya said, increase the number of good paying jobs and support economic resilience and community resilience. Let's think about all of the things that we can do with that synergistic approach and really build a stronger state, a stronger set of communities, a stronger nation. It's exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. And I'll just add one more quick thing. I think, David said we can't achieve our goals without the help of the federal government. And I think the federal government also won't be bold enough unless Maine tells them to be. And so I think that's something that I feel excited about with this new administration. Maine's goals are bolder than the United States as a whole. And we have an opportunity here to really push our federal delegation and push the federal government to act more strongly and more boldly on climate. So I'll leave it at that. But
right on. And what a great transition, because Maine's climate goals are bolder in part because we made them bolder. The folks watching help push push the governor and others to set strong goals. And so we should be proud. And I know we're very thankful, of course, for all the help. And so now it comes to how can we take action? What can we do, right? So we had hoped originally when we scheduled this that we would be in the midst of lots of votes and hearings and things. We're not quite at there. The legislature this year is moving a little slower, I think, than they like. They are adopting to COVID protocols. They are meeting remotely. And so things are moving a little slower than usual. But of course, as we do, the organizations on this call are going to keep you informed of opportunities to take action and different ways to do that. I'm going to post in the chat a couple things. These are some links to receive alerts from Maine Audubon. Sierra Club is putting on a bunch of great trainings that can help you get ready for the coming session. MCV has an advocacy series coming up there. If you heard about this event today, you probably are in tune with some of us. So stay on those tracks, listen, because we will be ready to pounce when the time is right on any of the actions that we've been talking about today. But I want to turn it over to Todd Martin now, because as I said, this year is a little different than usual. And I want to make sure that he's going to give you some great information on what that means for you and how you can make your voice heard most effectively. So Todd?
Great, thanks very much, Nick. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and start from the beginning here. Just bear with me for 1 second. All right, so fantastic. So as Nick said, this legislative session, along with kind of life in general, look fundamentally different. The legislature, as you know by now, is meeting virtually and remotely, and public hearings are happening online via Zoom. The two kind of upsides here is that one, you don't have to travel to Augusta to participate in a public hearing. And two, you already are clearly able to join a Zoom webinar because you're here today. So you're fully able to just rest assured that you are well equipped to participate in public hearings this session. And you've heard about several pieces of legislation and bonds that are going to be coming forward. We're going to need folks like you to testify at these upcoming public hearings to ensure that those bills get over the finish line. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes. I know we're a little short on time, but I want to cover two things to help you participate in the legislative session this year. So I'll cover quickly how to participate in a virtual public hearing via Zoom, and also how to submit written testimony online. So starting with submitting your testimony online, this is a new process for this year. You used to have to just email the committee clerks with your testimony, but there is now an online testimony submission portal, and it's very simple to use, and I'll show you how to use it in just a minute. But just a couple of quick steps. So this is the URL, mainelegislature.org/testimony. You'll first select the committee that you want to submit your testimony to, the date of the public hearing, and then you have to select the bill. And again, I'll show you this in just a moment. You'll upload your testimony either as a doc or a PDF, or you can type it directly into the text box on the screen, enter your information. The last step is confirm that you're not a robot. If you are a robot, don't submit written testimony, and then hit submit. I'll note, if you would like to submit written testimony after the public hearing has happened, you need to email it directly to the committee clerk. So I want to stop sharing this screen, and I want to share a different screen, if I can find it here, to show you what this actually looks like. So this is the online testimony submission portal. Again, mainelegislature.org/testimony. So the first thing you do right here is choose your committee you want to submit testimony to. Let's pick Environment, Natural Resources. That's where a lot of the bills we work on go to. You'll need to select the date here. So you'll see the dates that they have for upcoming public hearings. I'm just going to select February 22nd to move us along here. And then what you'll see is the 3 bills that will be heard that day. So the LD 39, an act to remove the plastic bag ban. You should testify against that. So pick the bill you want to testify on or you want to submit testimony on. And then right here is where you can upload your testimony as a PDF or a Word doc. Or you can just type it right here in the text box. Then enter your information, confirm you're not a robot, and hit submit and register. So it's pretty simple to use. This will make sure that all the lawmakers on the committee receive your testimony, and they'll be able to actually read along with your testimony as you're presenting, if you want to present at the actual public hearing. So let me get back here into my slides. So that's how to submit written testimony online. If you actually want to speak at a public hearing on Zoom, here are some steps on how to do that. So Here's a snapshot from a recent public hearing. This is what they look like, similar to what we look like here on the screen right now. So the first step is you have to sign up for these virtual public hearings. Again, they're happening on Zoom webinar. You're here today, so you're well equipped to sign up for these. You want to sign up using the same testimony submission portal that I just showed you. But there's a little checkbox at the bottom of that box that says, I would like to present testimony live. Just make sure that you check that box. And then you'll immediately receive an email from the committee clerk with a link to register for the hearing. So make sure you look for that email, complete that registration. Once you complete that registration, you'll automatically get an email from Zoom confirming your registration, and you'll receive the link for the webinar. A couple quick tips. Of course, join the hearing on time. You don't want to be late. When you join a virtual public hearing this session, again, it's in webinar, so just like today, your video and your audio will be disabled. You'll be able to see and hear the committee members, but they won't be able to see you quite yet. Make sure that your lighting is adequate, that your background is free of distractions, or that you have a cool mandala behind you. And make sure that your camera is positioned from your shoulders up. So it's important to make sure that you have some good Zoom etiquette and you don't end up looking like this guy on Zoom. When it's your time to testify, the clerk of the committee will promote you from an attendee to a panelist. You'll have to accept, you'll have a little blue box pop up and you'll have to accept on your Zoom screen, and then your video will be enabled. So the committee will be able to see you, as will everybody who's tuning into the hearing. However, you'll stay on mute. You need to physically unmute yourself when it's your time to testify. When the chair calls on you to speak, unmute yourself and read your testimony. And when you're done, the committee clerk will change you back to an attendee, and so that your video and audio will be turned off again. And that's it. Again, you're here today, so you have all the tools you need to be able to participate in a virtual public hearing this legislative session. And the last thing I'll say is, if you just want to watch a public hearing, you don't want to testify at a public hearing, the Maine Legislature has its own YouTube page, and each committee has its own channel. So if you go to YouTube and just type in the search bar Maine Legislature and click on this channels tab, you'll see all the committees in the legislature and recordings of their past public hearings and what they have coming up. So that's all I got, and I'll turn it back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. That is really useful information. And we hope you all wrote it down. Is there a source from NRCM to maybe, or somewhere else, to get that information outside of this presentation?
NRCM is putting together actually some video tutorials on how to manage this process. We're also coming up with a new web page that will go live in the next couple of weeks. So certainly stay tuned.
Great. Yeah, this, as someone said in the chat, this is a more environmentally friendly and easier way to do it once we get a hang of it. So we hope you can all take advantage. So I am looking at the clock. There are lots of questions. Let's just dive right in. If you guys have additional questions, put them in the Q&A box. And we're just going to get started with a little free-for-all and some questions. Starting with, there are a couple of questions in there about municipalities. How can towns in Maine, what role can towns play in implementing these policies or pushing some of these policies? I'm not sure who wants to answer, but if someone will.
Yeah, just like the federal government can offer support and needs to be pushed by states, municipalities can, the state needs to be pushed and can offer support to towns. So a lot of towns have energy committees and local efforts that have really helped lay the groundwork for the climate action plan and will be a key part of implementing it. One of the things that the community resilience supergroup, they called it, tackled in the climate council process was just what kind of support do municipalities need? It's a big job, and they're in the process of mapping out what kind of resources and sort of centralized information the state can provide to municipalities, as well as additional funding. So stay tuned.
Excellent, thank you. A couple of questions here and some talk in the chat I saw about Indigenous Mainers and how the tribes are a part of this, or how this plays out. I'm wondering if maybe Anya, Wright, you could talk for a minute about that question.
Yeah, sure. And I'm not as familiar with the bill that's in the legislature. So Kathleen or David, I invite you to talk about that too. But yeah, I think the environmental movement needs to be uplifting and supporting tribal voices as we address climate change in this state. The Wabanaki people are, the original inhabitants of this land, and have not only deep knowledge of the land that we're on, but also we have a responsibility to uplift their voices and to be in solidarity with them. So I feel encouraged and excited about where policy and the environmental movement in general is moving towards uplifting tribal voices. I think we have a long way to go. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I appreciate all the questions about tribal sovereignty and tribes in Maine.
I'll just add that there was an equity analysis conducted on all of the recommendations presented by the working groups of the Climate Council, and that played a role in the Climate Council's decision-making about what ended up in the plan. And one of the things that came out of that was a new ongoing equity subcommittee, which was announced last week on the Climate Council had one of its quarterly meetings, and I believe will be announcing membership of that in the next week or so. And that committee will be charged with monitoring the implementation of the climate action plan and making sure that it has an equity focus. Excellent,
thank you.
Hey, Nick.
Yep.
Just add a couple of things on municipal support.
Of course.
Also, the state does have funding. Efficiency Maine does have funding for municipalities, for instance, for electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as some efficiency improvements for municipal buildings. The other thing is if this adaptation fund is established, that would certainly be direct funding assistance. Also, the state is looking at doing some pilot programs immediately with philanthropy support and a number of municipalities to help with resilience planning, adaptation planning, those kinds of vulnerability assessments, those kinds of things. So the state is really trying to step up its support to Maine's communities, particularly those that don't have a lot of capacity themselves.
I think Great. Just jumping off of that quickly, and one more thought, kind of tying these two themes together, I think getting engaged in your community, like Kathleen said, is such a good way to push the state government to do more. And I think also when it comes to uplifting voices that need to be heard, building strong communities and having strong community action around climate change is also such a vital part of our work. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks. A question in the chat for Todd, if I may. Karen asks, is it important to read the testimony online at a hearing rather than just submit it?
Sure, that's a great question, Karen. So, lawmakers are typically serve on one or two committees, and each of their committees is considering about 100 bills in a typical session. These lawmakers are not all experts on the issues that they're considering at the committee level. And they simply just don't have enough hours in the day to read all of the testimony that's submitted in written form. So actually going to the hearing and reading it live at the public hearing ensures that they hear your testimony and hear directly from you why it matters to you and to your family and to your community. So, reading your testimony live at a public hearing is really the most impactful way to get your testimony across.
Thanks, Todd. Maybe a related question from Steve here is, what's the best clearinghouse for information about bills and movements other than, Does someone have a great answer for that? Want to plug their own system maybe?
I'll plug NRCM's.
There you go.
NRCM has its legislative bill tracking page. It's a page on our website that tracks our top priority bills, and a link to NRCM's testimony and position on the bill, a link to any of our fact sheets, upcoming dates for public hearings, and the outcomes of the votes. So that's a great resource. You could also sign up to receive emails from the committee clerks, which is a lot of emails, but it's the most surefire way to stay in the loop about when public hearings and work sessions are coming up. So the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and the Energy, Utilities, and Technologies Committee are where most of our issues go to. So if you really want to be in the loop, you could sign up for updates from those committees.
Thank you. And we are over past 1 o'clock. We have a lot of questions. We're not going to get to all of them, and I apologize in advance for that. If you want to email me with your questions, if they don't get answered, maine.audubon.org, I'm happy to pass them on to the appropriate person or answer them. So just to be wary of time, but if panelists are okay, we'll do a couple more. That's all right. David, this one may be for someone about electric vehicle affordability. The prices are coming down and things are changing, but do we expect either from the federal government or statewide any other incentives or credits or things for electric vehicle purchase?
Well, Efficiency Maine is in the process of actually updating their rebate policy. So for instance, now they'll offer rebates for used electric vehicles as more of those come online, particularly those that may come in from Massachusetts, which obviously is deploying a lot more electric vehicles than Maine right now. So that's one option. There's more money for low and moderate income residents as well, the rebate to buy an electric vehicle. The price points are coming down. I think people realize that they're still a bit more expensive than gas cars, fueled cars, but all of that is starting to work. And of course the marketing, the car manufacturers themselves are coming out with a broader range of vehicles. They're going to have pickup trucks this year, and of course Mainers buy a lot of pickup trucks and use a lot of pickup trucks and SUVs. So it's going to be a shift. It's a bit of a gradual shift, but we expect that to accelerate. The federal government provides assistance, although tax credits are good, but only for, they tend to favor higher income people. So we prefer rebates, and we'd like to see the federal government do more along those lines to help low and moderate income households afford this transition.
And I'll just add that one of the things that was a pretty usual occurrence before COVID were these events called ride and drives, where you could actually go and see a whole bunch of EVs and take them out for a spin. This is like a lot of new technology, right? It seems really foreign until it's so commonplace that you can't imagine life without it. And we're in the middle of that process right now. Efficiency Maine did a little presentation yesterday and shared that there are 22 eligible vehicles right now for their rebates, and they expect that to increase dramatically because this is a case where industry really is seeing the writing on the wall, and they're going to start rolling out more EVs at a wider price rate, range of price points. And it's true, we wish it would all happen tomorrow, but that's the beauty of that EV roadmap process is we are going to get there.
Hey, Nick, just to add one thing as well, and Kathleen, is people should understand that the studies they've shown rural residents, and of course Maine's a rural state, rural residents will save twice as much a year on a zero emitting vehicle than urban and suburban drivers. So again, they'll save a lot on maintenance. There's very little maintenance cost with regard to EVs. And of course, you don't pay for gas. So a critical selling point is you're going to save a lot of money eventually with an electric vehicle or a zero emitting vehicle.
Excellent, thank you. I see a question from Dina here that I want to get to about school curriculums, and are there programs in here to address education of the young? They did, and I'd love to have someone else speak more to it, but in one of the areas of the Climate Action Plan, parts of the implementation plan we didn't cover, there's a section for communication, and increasing pre-K to 12th grade education programs about climate change as part of that. I don't know any more details or if that's in progress, but it is happening. Anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit more detail, and I'm not totally up to speed on what's happening now, but out of the climate action plan came a call for evaluating our K through 12 education as it has to do with climate change. I know I graduated high school in 2015, barely learned about climate change, really had to self-select in college to learn more deeply about the climate crisis. And so, yeah, education around climate change is really vital moving forward. It is a part of the curriculum, but there just aren't enough resources for teacher training, aren't enough resources on climate justice and non-science portions of climate change. So yes, it's being worked on. And that's, yeah, more to come.
Awesome. Well, it's 1:10. I set that as the goal that we would not go over more than that. I apologize that all the questions we didn't get to, especially Heidi. I know you have an urgent question. If you'd like to talk with me about that, I'm happy to get you an answer. Does any last words from the folks on the panel?
Thanks to everybody for joining, and Nick, thanks for offering to be a contact. You can also reach out, I'm sure, to any of us, and our organizations love to keep in touch and send you action alerts and let you know when we need you, which is always. So thank you.
And I was asked to put my email back in the chat. It's nlund@maineaudubon.org. Thank you all very much for joining. Thank you to my panelists, Kathleen, David, Anya, and Todd. And thanks everyone for joining. Stay in touch. We still got a lot of work to do, but we're going to do it. Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.